Your life as Elon Musk. The spreadsheet is open. It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in Pretoria, South Africa, and you are 10 years old, and you are not doing homework. You are reading an encyclopedia. Not because a teacher told you to, because you finished the school library 2 months ago. Every book, every volume, every reference section, and now you are working through the family set at home, alphabetically, and you are somewhere in the E's, and what you are reading about is energy and electricity and engines, and something in the way these systems connect to each other is producing a feeling in your chest that you do not yet have a word for. The word you will learn later is purpose. But right now it is just a feeling, and the feeling is enough to keep you reading until 2 a.m. while the rest of the house sleeps. Your childhood is not a soft one. Your father, Errol, is a man of sharp edges and long silences, and the home you grow up in has a particular kind of coldness that has nothing to do with temperature. You learn early that the world is not designed to be comfortable for people who think differently. You are relentlessly, visibly different. You say things in class that confuse your teachers and irritate your classmates. You are beaten up more than once. You spend lunch breaks alone, reading, or staring at a wall, running calculations in your head that no one around you is interested in. You understand, at an age when most children are still learning the rules of games, that the world itself is a system, and that systems can be understood, and if they can be understood, they can be changed. At 12, you teach yourself to code. At 13, you sell your first video game, a space-themed shooter called Blaster, to a computer magazine for $500. You look at the check for a long time, not because of what it can buy, because of what it proves. That the thing inside your head has value in the world outside it. That the distance between an idea and a product is just work. You leave South Africa at 17. You leave because you can see, with the same clarity that you see everything, that staying is a ceiling. You arrive in Canada with almost nothing, work on a farm, clean out a boiler room for $18 an hour and think. You are always thinking. You transfer to the University of Pennsylvania, study economics and physics simultaneously, and when a professor asks you to identify the problems that will matter most to the future of humanity, you write a list that is both naive and completely correct. The internet, sustainable energy, and making life multiplanetary. You are 20 years old. You file this list away, and you begin. In 1995, you get accepted to a PhD program in energy physics at Stanford University. You defer it after 2 days. 2 days. The internet is beginning, and you can feel it the way a sailor feels weather. Something fundamental is shifting in the atmosphere of human civilization, and you're not going to sit in a classroom while it happens. You and your brother Kimball start a company called Zip2, a city guide software business, in a small office where you also sleep on a futon because you cannot yet afford rent and an office simultaneously. You shower at the YMCA. You work. A venture capital firm offers to fund the company on the condition that they replace you as CEO. You accept the condition. This is something most people do not understand about you, that you are willing to be humiliated in the short term if the long term requires it. Zip2 is sold to Compaq in 1999 for $307 million. Your share is $22 million. You immediately put almost all of it into the next thing. X.com becomes PayPal. PayPal is sold to eBay in 2002 for $1.5 billion. Your share is $180 million. And here is the moment that separates you from every other person who has ever made this amount of money at this age. Most people stop. You do not stop. You have never understood stopping. You look at the money, and you look at your list, the list from the Pennsylvania classroom, and you begin making decisions that every financial advisor in your orbit tells you will destroy you. You put $100 million into a rocket company, SpaceX. Your friends think you are having a breakdown. Some of them say this to your face. You sit with engineers in a warehouse in El Segundo, California, and you begin designing rockets from first principles, not by hiring the experience to exist around you, but by learning the physics yourself, the metallurgy yourself, the propulsion chemistry yourself, until you understand every system well enough to identify where the industry has been wrong for 50 years. The prevailing assumption in aerospace is that rockets are single-use, that the economics of space travel are fixed, that the cost per kilogram to orbit is a constant. You decide these are cultural assumptions, not physical laws, and you set out to disprove them. In 2006, the first Falcon 1 fails on launch. In 2007, the second fails. In 2008, the third fails. By the time of the third failure, SpaceX has nearly run out of money, and Tesla, the electric car company you have co-founded and taken over as CEO, is also burning through cash and missing production targets. You are simultaneously fighting a liquidity crisis at two companies, going through a painful divorce, and being openly mocked in the press. A journalist publishes a piece titled something like Elon Musk's Two Spectacular Failures. You read it. You have always read everything written about you. You continue working. Tesla and SpaceX, you will later say, were each separately likely to fail. The probability of both surviving was close to zero. You knew this in 2008. You kept going anyway. This is not courage in the Hollywood sense, not a moment of drama, not a single decision made under pressure with swelling music. It is something quieter and more brutal. It is the daily choice, made in the morning before anyone else is awake, to continue. To take the problem from yesterday and apply force to it again today. In September 2008, the fourth Falcon 1 reaches orbit. It is the first privately funded liquid-fueled rocket in history to do so. 2 months later, NASA awards SpaceX a contract for $1.6 billion. Tesla closes a round of funding hours before it would have gone bankrupt. You cry for the first time in years in a room alone, and then you go back to work. The decade that follows is documented, dissected, turned into films and case studies and business school curricula. But what the case studies miss is the texture of it, the actual experience of being inside the decision-making engine. You are now running multiple companies simultaneously. SpaceX, Tesla, SolarCity. You are scheduling your days in 5-minute blocks. You sleep at the factory when production is behind. You eat at your desk. You send emails at 1 a.m. and expect responses by morning because the engineers who work for you are the same kind of person you are, people for whom the problem is more interesting than comfort. Tesla's Model 3 nearly kills the company a second time. You are trying to produce 5,000 cars per week and the factory is failing. You are sleeping on the factory floor. Literally sleeping on the floor of the Fremont facility, under a conference table because going home costs 45 minutes in each direction and you cannot afford 45 minutes. You are losing weight. You are publicly erratic. In one of the most watched interviews in tech media history, you take a single puff of marijuana on a podcast and the stock drops 9% the following morning. You watch the number fall, and you feel it as a physical thing because you know what every percentage point represents in terms of production capacity, jobs, mission. You keep working. The mission is not a talking point. This is what people who cover you get wrong consistently across 2 decades of coverage. They frame the mission as marketing, as narrative construction, as the cultivated image of a visionary. But if you follow the money, your money, the actual financial decisions you have made with your actual assets, the pattern is not that of a man building a brand. It is the pattern of a man who genuinely believes that human civilization has a single point of failure problem, which is that it exists only on one planet, and that if something goes wrong, an asteroid, a pandemic on a scale larger than anything we have seen, a slow civilizational decline, everything is gone. Not some people. Everything. Every book, every song, every idea, every child. You find this thought unbearable in a way that is not metaphorical. It is a source of active, ongoing dread that has never left you since you first understood it as a teenager reading about the Fermi paradox, the disturbing silence of the universe, the absence of other civilizations that should statistically be there but aren't, and what that silence might mean. This is why you are trying to get to Mars. Not for exploration. Not for science in the abstract. For insurance. For backup. For the same reason that careful people store copies of things that matter. When Falcon 9 lands its first booster upright in December 2015, you watch from mission control and you are unable to speak for several seconds. The room is chaos. Engineers who have spent years believing this was possible but never quite being sure are screaming, hugging, crying. You stand very still, and you are crying too, and what you are feeling is not triumph. It is relief. Relief that the physics worked. Relief that the first principles held. Relief that the answer to "is this possible?" turned out to be yes. The Starship program begins. It is the largest rocket ever built. It explodes repeatedly in the Texas sky above Boca Chica, and each explosion is photographed and shared and turned into content, and you watch the footage, and you see data. You see exactly where the system failed, and you instruct the team to fix it, and you go back to the board. Failure is information. Failure is the universe telling you something true about your assumptions. You have never understood why people treat failure as the opposite of progress. It is progress. It is the most reliable form of progress. In 2022, you acquire Twitter for $44 billion. It is the most controversial thing you have ever done, and you have done many controversial things. You fire half the staff within weeks. You reintroduce accounts that had been banned. You rename the platform X. The media coverage is apocalyptic. Advertisers leave. Employees cry publicly in interviews. You watch all of it, and you continue restructuring the company according to your own analysis of what a functional information network should look like. You believe that free speech, the kind that is genuinely uncomfortable, genuinely contested, genuinely adversarial, is load-bearing infrastructure for civilization in the same way that power grids and internet cables are load-bearing infrastructure. You may be wrong about specific decisions. You are not performing a belief. The belief is real. By 2024, you are the richest person in the history of the world. The number is so large it has become abstract, not money in any experience sense, but a score in a game whose rules you set. You do not have a yacht. You have said publicly that you do not want a yacht. What you have is a small rented house near the SpaceX facility in Boca Chica and children you are trying, imperfectly, to be present for. You have said that your biggest failure is not being a good enough father. You say it without a prepared speech. You say it like a man who has looked at the list of things he has not solved and is honest about what is on it. The day does not end. This is the most accurate thing that can be said about your life. The day does not end because the problems do not end, and the problems do not end because the scope of what you have decided to attempt is simply larger than a single lifetime of days. You are building rockets to Mars. You are building an electric grid. You are building a brain-computer interface company, Neuralink, that is beginning human trials. You are building a tunnel company because you decided the problem of urban traffic was solvable if you approached it differently. You are building an AI company because you believe artificial general intelligence is either the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat in human history, and you are not willing to be absent from that conversation. You are 53 years old, and you still have the list from the Pennsylvania classroom. Not literally, but you have never stopped working through it. And the feeling in your chest, the one you felt at 10 years old, reading about energy and electricity and engines in Pretoria at 2 a.m. while the house slept, that feeling has not left. It is still there every morning before the alarm, every night when the work runs past midnight. It is the feeling of a problem that is larger than you, and the decision, renewed every single day, to try anyway. The spreadsheet is open. The day begins again. Could you handle 1 week inside Elon Musk's mind? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want to live inside the stories of the people who are actually reshaping the world, subscribe. We're just getting started.